Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show that's really engineered to cut through all that noise, bypass the information overload, and just bring you straight to the crucial insights, the things you actually need to be genuinely well-informed.
Yeah, we all know that feeling, right? You've got, like, a stack of articles, maybe some interesting research, notes scattered everywhere.
Exactly. And you just want to grasp the core concepts, the really important bits, without spending forever sifting through every single word.
Well, that's precisely our mission here. We're kind of your shortcut, your guides, navigating all the complexity so you don't have to.
And today, we're diving into something pretty special. A really fascinating intellectual journey, actually.
We are. It's a deep dive into a seminal philosophical work, one that, despite its fame and massive influence, has had this surprisingly bumpy publishing history, often out of print for ages.
Which one is it?
We're talking about F.H. Bradley's Ethical Studies, first published way back in 1876.
Wow, 1876.
Yeah. And our source material today, it's drawn from key excerpts from the 1951 edition. But what's really telling is that Bradley himself, he planned revisions apparently, but never actually changed the essentials of his belief.
Really? So he stuck to his guns?
Completely, which says a lot, I think, about his conviction. You know, how robust he felt his arguments were.
That really is a powerful endorsement. And, if you've ever found philosophy a bit, well, dry, or maybe too academic, Bradley might just surprise you.
Oh, definitely. His writing style, it's something else.
How so?
It's often described as incredibly precise, really intense, but also remarkably witty, even sharply caustic sometimes.
Witty, a philosopher.
Yeah, and he has this singular honesty. Like, he openly admits when he thinks he might be wrong or when he hits a contradiction he can't quite figure out within a certain framework.
That's pretty rare, especially for someone of his stature. It's refreshing, actually.
It really is. It makes for a very engaging read, which is kind of paradoxical when you think about it, because the man himself was a total recluse for most of his life.
A recluse, but hailed as this great mind.
Exactly. Rarely seen by colleagues or students. Some contemporaries called him the best mind in England, yet he lived almost entirely in his own head, pouring everything into his writing. His life was his intellectual life.
And that writing definitely made waves. You mentioned Ethical Studies was epoch-making.
That's what contemporaries like Bosanquet called its initial publication, a huge turning point in British philosophy. And right at the heart of this epoch-making work are these really fundamental questions, things we still grapple with today, like why should I be moral? And maybe even more universally, what actually constitutes the good life?
Okay, the big ones. But you mentioned something provocative earlier about his stance on free will.
Ah, yes. And here's where it gets really interesting, and maybe challenging for a lot of us. Because Bradley doesn't just ask these questions. He dives right in, and he hints pretty early on at a surprising and quite challenging aspect of his whole philosophy.
Which is
his rather unconventional take on something we often see as totally fundamental, our basic notion of free will.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. So what's the plan for this deep dive? How are we going to unpack all this?
Well, we're going to unpack Bradley's core arguments, look at his sharp critiques of common ethical theories many of us probably hold without realizing it.
Right.
Then we'll get into his proposed solutions for how we ought to live. And finally, how all this shapes a really distinctive, maybe even counterintuitive view of individual liberty and our place in the world.
Sounds like we should buckle up. Some assumptions might get challenged.
I think that's a safe bet.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Starting point.
Yeah.
That very first question Bradley tackles, why should I be moral? It sounds like such a normal, logical question to ask, doesn't it? Like, What's in it for me? What's the point?
It absolutely does seem natural. We ask why about everything. Yeah. But Bradley, he argues that just asking why should I be moral in that way, it already rests on what he calls a dogmatic preconception.
A dogmatic preconception.
For him, asking why, like, that is actually opposed to the moral consciousness itself. Think about it. When you ask why, you're kind of assuming morality is just a means to something else, right? Some ulterior end, something beyond goodness itself.
Ah, okay. Like you're looking for a justification that isn't just because it's good.
Precisely. It's like asking, why should I breathe? The answer isn't so I can get paid. It's because breathing is living. If you're asking, why be moral? Looking for some external reward, Bradley thinks you've already fundamentally misunderstood what morality is.
You've missed the boat before you've even started.
That's a good way to put it. From his viewpoint, true moral consciousness believes to do good for its own sake is virtue. If you do something good for some ulterior end or object not itself good, well, then It is never virtue.
So approaching morality as just a what for means you've already sidestepped its actual value.
Exactly. He's saying the question itself is kind of misguided because it shows a basic misunderstanding. It's a bit like asking, what's the practical benefit of goodness itself? Within a truly moral framework, that question just doesn't compute.
Okay, so if morality isn't just a means to some other end, what is the ultimate practical why for Bradley? He brings up this big idea, self-realization. That sounds potentially a bit vague. What's he really getting at?
It's definitely not simple. And yeah, it can sound a bit abstract. To really get it, we need to unpack what he means by self, real, and realize. And for Bradley, the self is absolutely not just, a flickering collection of feelings or passing thoughts or momentary states.
So not just a stream of consciousness then, or disconnected experiences. It's something more solid.
Much more solid, more coherent. He sees the self as a whole, a one in many or a many in one. Think of it as a living totality, or maybe a universal present throughout.
Like a symphony analogy used earlier, lots of parts, but the real thing is the unified whole.
Exactly like that. A complex piece of music isn't just the individual notes, it's the structured, harmonious whole that's more than the sum of its parts. So for Bradley, to realize the self is always to realize a whole, not just bits and pieces. It's about bringing all of yourself, your thoughts, feelings, actions, into a coherent, unified system, acting consistently from your deepest nature.
Okay, a unified, coherent self. And this view leads him to another really mind-bending idea, the infinite self. Now, when I hear infinite, I think endless, like a line going on forever. But you said Bradley critiques that.
He does, strongly. He argues the mind is infinite, but definitely not in that sense of being quantitatively endless, like a number series you just keep adding to. That, he says, is a perpetual self-contradiction.
I mean, contradictory.
Because any real quantity, no matter how big, always implies a boundary, right? An end you could theoretically reach. And he also says true infinity isn't just something over against the finite, because that would just make it another finite thing limited by what it's separate from.
Okay, so it's not about being boundless in size or just being separate from the finite. It's a different kind of infinity altogether. How does he describe it?
Yeah, it's qualitative. For Bradley, true infinity is the negation of the finite, but not by destroying it. It's by taking the finite up into a higher unity in which, becoming an element, it ceases to be a single, isolated finite. It becomes part of a larger whole. It's self-related, he says. Think of a circle looping back on itself, complete, rather than a straight line shooting off endlessly.
A circle, not a line. Okay.
And here's his really striking claim, maybe the most challenging bit. The knowledge of the limit suppresses the limit. What he means is, the mind can't be truly finite because it knows it's finite.
Wait, how does knowing the limit suppress it?
Think about it. If your mind can grasp its own limitations, understand what finitude is, then in that very act of understanding, it's already stepped beyond those limitations conceptually. It's like an artist knowing the edges of their canvas. That knowledge allows them to conceive of a space beyond the canvas, even while working within it. The mind, by knowing its limits, shows it's not ultimately bound by them.
Wow. Okay, that is deep. So because the mind knows its finitude, it's already, in a way, transcended it, making it infinite in this qualitative sense.
That's the core idea. So to realize oneself must mean realizing oneself is infinite, which he defines as be specified in yourself, but not specified by anything foreign to yourself.
Meaning become fully yourself, defined from within, not by external pressures or limitations.
Exactly. Become an internally coherent, self-sufficient whole. And this is absolutely crucial for understanding why he sees moral life as a perpetual progress. We constantly have the sense of an other which is to be, and yet never quite is myself.
The ideal self we're striving for.
Right. We're always striving to bring all those external relations, experiences, actions within me, making them part of our unified infinite self. But it's an unending process, this striving for internal harmony and completeness, because the ideal of a perfectly realized self, we never finally achieve it in our finite lives.
And this idea of the self as a whole, the striving infinite self, it also shapes how he sees the will itself. You mentioned the will has two sides, universal and particular.
It does. The universal side is, well, the will in general, the basic capacity for willing that we all have as rational beings. The particular side is the specific thing we desire or choose this or that object, helping a friend, choosing a job, whatever.
Yeah.
Volition, the act of willing, for Bradley, isn't just one or the other. It's the identity of these two things. It's the universal will expressing itself in a concrete, particular act. It's the projection or carrying of it out into external existence.
So my will isn't separate from my action. The action is the realization of my will.
Precisely. And this connects everything. Your actions, yourself, how you find yourself in the world. It's not through random, isolated choices, but by impressing your will, your whole self onto the world in a harmonious, systemic way. It's the self realizing itself through what it does.
Okay, that's a really rich foundation. The self as a striving, infinite whole, realized through its willing actions. Now, with that in mind, Bradley turns his critical eye on other ethical theories, right? The common answers people give. And he wasn't exactly gentle about it.
Not at all. He pulls no punches. Let's start with hedonism, the idea that pleasure for pleasure's sake, is the ultimate good. He famously calls this an illusory end.
Illusory. Why does he dismiss pleasure like that? Seems like a pretty popular goal.
Well, his main hammer blow against hedonism, whether it's your own pleasure or the utilitarian pleasure of all, is that the whole idea of a sum or the all of pleasures is a self-contradiction.
The self-contradiction, how?
Because pleasures, just by their nature, are arising and perishing, they're fleeting, they come and go. So trying to aim for a sum of them, an accumulated total, it's impossible. The moment you feel a pleasure, it's already starting to fade.
Like trying to fill a leaky bucket.
Exactly. He uses those great classical images. The stone of Sisyphus always rolling back down, or the vessel of the Danaids endlessly pouring water into a sieve. You can never reach it, never actually possess a fixed sum of pleasure. And he adds, with that typical wit, if happiness just means as much pleasure as a man can get, then technically everyone is always happy in every moment, which is just absurd. That's not what we mean by happiness.
Right. And beyond being contradictory, did he think it was just practically useless as a guide for life?
Absolutely useless. He states flatly, it gives no rule of life. Think about a moral almanac, a list of rules based on past experience about what brings pleasure. That's looking backward. It's not a law for me now, because if the ultimate goal is my pleasure, then logically I have to be the final judge of what maximizes it in my specific situation. And if everyone is their own judge, then any kind of universal moral rule becomes totally ineffective.
Anyone could justify anything based on their own calculation of pleasure.
Precisely. He uses the example of adultery. A consistent hedonist could logically justify breaking marriage vows or any social norm if they genuinely believe it will lead to the greatest pleasure overall for them, or maybe even for everyone involved. What society calls immoral could become moral under their theory.
Which seems completely at odds with how most people experience morality, this sense that some things are just wrong.
Exactly. That's his point. It's deeply irreconcilable with actual moral consciousness. The moral person does not think it acts to get pleasure. To say they do is to turn the moral point of view upside down.
And he even questioned the psychology behind it, whether we can genuinely desire others' pleasure for its own sake if our primary drive is always our own.
He did. He found the psychological basis shaky. If all I can possibly desire is my pleasure, my isolated feeling, then desiring the pleasure of others for their own sake, not just because it makes me feel good. Well, he says that's psychologically impossible.
So attempts like utilitarianism to combine self-interest with the good of all.
He famously calls that combination a monster. A monster with its heart in the right place, but the brain is wanting. Meaning, yeah, the intention might be good, the heart, but the philosophical logic, the brain, is fundamentally flawed. It tries to smash together two motivations, pure self-interest and genuine altruism, that he thinks are psychologically incompatible at that basic level.
Okay, so hedonism is out psychologically broken, practically useless. What about the other big one he critiques? Duty for duty's sake, the Kantian approach. That seems much more high-minded, focused on principle.
It certainly does, and Bradley acknowledges its nobility. This theory says the good will is the universal formal will, determined purely by the form only, the principle of non-contradiction. You do your duty because it's your duty, out of respect for the universal moral law, not for any outcome or feeling.
Sounds good. Principled, logical, don't contradict yourself. What's Bradley's issue with that?
Well, he argues that this very principle, realized non-contradiction, is actually a hopeless contradiction in itself when you try to apply it.
How could don't contradict yourself be a contradiction?
Because think about it, to realize non-contradiction in the real world, you have to do something. The formal will, which is supposed to be pure form, like an empty container, has to take on content to become an actual act of willing. But any specific content, Bradley argues, inevitably contradicts form without content.
Like an empty rule book isn't useful until you write rules in it, but the rules aren't derived from the fact the book is empty.
Something like that. The form needs content to be real, but the content isn't generated by the pure form itself. And there's another problem. If morality is defined by this tension between the pure, formal will and our messy, sensuous self, our desires, inclinations, what happens if you actually succeed in negating the sensuous self completely?
Morality disappears because the tension is gone.
Exactly. Morality, defined by that struggle, would cease to exist if the struggle ended. It sets up a goal that, if achieved, would make the whole enterprise meaningless. It's a self-defeating structure.
Okay, so theoretically problematic. What about practically? Does it actually tell you what to do?
That's his other major criticism. It's worthless and of no avail for practice. It gives us no information. The maxim realize non-contradiction is just too abstract. It doesn't tell you what actions are right or wrong in a concrete situation.
You can't derive specific duties from just be consistent.
Pretty much. He says anything can be framed as a tautology. Stealing is stealing. Honesty is honesty. That doesn't help you decide whether to steal or be honest. Any real content, any specific duty you try to fit under the principle, like don't lie, has to be arbitrarily postulated, brought in from outside. It doesn't logically flow from the bare principle of non-contradiction itself.
Okay, and what about those tricky situations where duties seem to clash? Like the classic dilemma. Lie to the murderer at the door to save your friend hiding inside.
Kantianism struggles massively there. Bradley points out it's completely unable to resolve these conflicting duties. If the duty not to lie is absolute and the duty to protect life is absolute, what do? The theory either falls silent, offering no guidance, or it destroys duty by an abstract universal that cannot be applied. It insists on absolute rules that inevitably crash into each other in the complexities of real life, leaving you morally paralyzed.
So, noble idea, but ultimately empty and impractical for real moral decisions.
That's Bradley's assessment. A beautiful but ultimately hollow formalism.
All right, so if hedonism fails and Kantian formalism fails, where does Bradley lead us? What's his positive vision? You mentioned my station and its duties. That sounds much more grounded.
It is. This is where he pivots completely. His positive vision redefines the goal, the ethical end. It's not abstract principle, not fleeting pleasure. It's the realization of ourselves as the will, which is above ourselves, and specifically realizing ourselves as a member of a community.
Okay, so the focus shifts dramatically, away from the isolated individual trying to figure things out on their own towards the person embedded in society.
Exactly. And this is where he launches that powerful critique of individualism. He famously calls the idea of an individual apart from the community a fiction.
A fiction. That's a very strong claim, especially for us today.
It is. He doesn't hold back. He leans on that classical idea.
Yeah.
Man is zoon politikon, a social animal, fundamentally. We are only real, he argues, because we are social. Think about it. Where do we get our language, our ideas, our values, our basic ways of thinking and feeling?
From our family, our culture, our society.
Precisely. He says you owe your very essence to the community, the history, the culture you're born into. And then he has that great line, if you make abstraction of all this, what you have left is not an Englishman, nor a man, but some I know not what residuum, which never has existed by itself.
You're some abstract blob, not a real person.
Right. He says the soul within him is saturated with the universal life of his community. So to turn against your community, to try and be purely individualistic is, in a deep sense, to turn against yourself, against the very source of your moral being.
So the community isn't just a backdrop. It's formative. It's almost alive.
That's exactly how he sees it. Human communities, family, society, the state are moral organisms. The whole is more than just the sum of its individual members. The relationships between the members are essential, not just accidental.
Like organs in a body. A lung only makes sense as part of the whole body.
Perfect analogy. Each part, each individual has a function, and their identity is defined by their contribution to the health and life of the whole organism. So to understand who someone is, morally speaking, you must not take him in isolation. Their duties, their purpose, their moral compass, it all comes from their station in the organism.
Their station. Meaning their place, their role, like
Yeah.
parent, teacher, citizen.
Exactly. Your specific place and function within the family, your profession, your town, your nation. That's where your duties lie. That's where you find your moral direction.
And he argues this view, my station and its duties, actually solves the problems the other theories couldn't. It brings together self-realization, duty, even happiness. How does that work?
Because in fulfilling the duties of your station, you are realizing yourself as a member of this larger moral whole. Self-realization isn't some abstract internal goal anymore. It happens through doing your part in the community. Duty isn't an alien command from outside. It's the specific expression of your role within the whole you belong to. And happiness. That comes from finding your purpose and fulfillment in playing that role well, identifying your will with the objective goodwill embodied in the community structure.
So it all clicks together.
Right. He says, the will of the whole knowingly wills itself in me. And so in willing my own function, I do know that the others will themselves in me. It allows the ordinary person doing their job, raising their family, being a good citizen, to be self-contented and happy. Why? Because they're aligning themselves with the goodwill realized in the world through their specific actions. Fulfill it we can, if we will. It's finding meaning by harmonizing your personal will with the larger will of the community.
That feels intuitively right for many people, doesn't it? Finding satisfaction in your role. But okay, if duties come from our station, how do we know what's right or wrong in a specific situation?
Yeah.
Do we just look up the rules for our station? Is that what moral philosophy does for Bradley?
No, he's very clear about that. Moral philosophy's job isn't to give you a list of rules for your station. Its job is to understand morals which exist, to analyze and make sense of the moral reality that's already there in society. It doesn't create morality. It studies it.
So how do we know what to do then, if it's not philosophy telling us?
He says we know what's right by an immediate judgment or an intuitive subsumption. It's not like working through a logical proof. It's more like a direct seeing or feeling of what fits, what's appropriate for the situation given your place in the community. It's practical wisdom.
More like moral intuition then, something you develop by living within that moral community, like learning a craft, where you eventually just know the right way.
Exactly like that. It's a cultivated sensibility. He controversially, maybe, but to make his point, uses the example of women's supposedly finer moral perceptions and quick judgments versus men's reasoning ability. The point is about this immediate, non-discursive knowing. The phronimos, the person of practical wisdom, is someone who has deeply identified his will with the moral spirit of the community and judges accordingly.
Like an experienced doctor who diagnoses based on feel and experience, not just textbook rules.
Perfect. And these judgments aren't just random personal feelings. They're rooted in the shared morality of the community as its basis. They're subject to the community's approval, in a sense. They embody a universal and impersonal morality because they reflect the shared understanding of the good within that social organism.
Okay, so morality is embedded in the community, learned intuitively. But does that mean it's fixed? Or how can it change? Societies evolve. He talks about relative and absolute morality.
Yes, this is crucial. He fully embraces an evolutionary view of morality. Moral codes are relative to time and place. They develop and change as human nature and society evolve.
How does he see that evolution happening?
He describes it as the humanizing of the bestial foundation of man's nature. It's about carrying out the true idea of man, realizing humanity as that infinite whole we talked about earlier, gradually, over time, building on our more primitive foundations.
So it's relative, but not completely relativistic. Not anything goes. There's still something absolute driving it.
Exactly. It's not radical relativism. Even though morality evolves and is relative to its stage, it's nonetheless real at each stage. Each historical period, however imperfectly, realizes something of the essence of man, the true idea of humanity. So it's absolute for that stage. History itself, for Bradley, is a story of true human nature working itself out through various incomplete stages toward completion.
And my station and its duties fits into this as the best way to live now within our current stage of that evolution.
Precisely. It's justified as the one satisfactory view of morals for its specific time and place, the way individuals can best realize themselves within the current unfolding of human moral potential.
That's a really sophisticated picture, grounded yet dynamic. But you hinted earlier that even this elegant solution, my station, isn't the final word for Bradley. He admits contradictions remain.
Yes, he's remarkably honest about its limitations. He says the solution is only partially solved. There's always this potential gap, this tension between the is, how society actually is, its structures, its flaws, and the ought to be, the moral ideal.
Especially if the society itself is flawed.
Right. In a confused or rotten community, one with deep injustice or corruption, simply fulfilling your assigned station might not feel fully moral. It could even mean being complicit in something wrong. Your duty might conflict with a higher sense of right.
And what about looking beyond your own community, thinking globally?
That's another challenge he acknowledges: cosmopolitan morality. Our awareness of other societies, other values, other times leads us to conceive of an ideal good person or universal moral principles that aren't strictly tied to our specific station in our specific society.
And personal ideals,
There-
like pursuing truth or art.
Exactly. He also notes duties to self, like the artist's drive for perfection, the scientist's pursuit of knowledge, the philosopher's quest for truth. These feel like real moral obligations, but they don't always fit neatly into a social station defined by function. They seem to point towards an individual ideal beyond just fulfilling a role.
So even within my station, there's still this pull towards something more, something not fully contained by the social structure.
Yes, the false private self, that part of us that feels separate, individual, not fully integrated, never completely vanishes. As Bradley admits, we are never realized absolutely within the realm of morality alone. The contradiction remains. There's still a striving and incompleteness, which strongly hints that maybe the ultimate resolution has to lie somewhere beyond morality itself.
Okay, this leads us right into that really crucial and perhaps most challenging aspect of Bradley's thought for us today. His view on free will. You said he makes this incredibly bold claim calling formal freedom a metaphysical fiction. What on earth does he mean by that?
He is incredibly direct about this, the cornerstone. He says, the mere formal freedom of choice, not only, if it were real, would not be true freedom, but that, in addition, it is a metaphysical fiction. Let's unpack that.
Please do.
Formal freedom is that idea of a pure, empty power of choice. A will with no content, a blank slate user that can just arbitrarily pick option A or option B without being determined by anything internal or external.
The kind of absolute freedom many people think they have.
Exactly. And Bradley says, first, even if that were real, it wouldn't be true freedom. We'll get to what true freedom is later. But second, and more fundamentally, he says it's impossible. It's nonsense. A metaphysical fiction.
Imposter.
Because to will, you have to will something. A will needs content, an object, a direction. A completely empty, undetermined chooser isn't actually a will at all. It's a void. It can't do anything. So the whole notion of a completely uncaused, arbitrary choice popping out of nowhere, he just dismisses it as an incoherent philosophical idea, an illusion.
Okay, so no purely arbitrary, unconstrained choice. How does he see volition, then? Is everything just predetermined like clockwork?
Not quite like clockwork. He sees volition as determined self-realization. Remember how the self is realized through action. He argues that what is desired must in all cases be self.
Meaning everything we desire is ultimately about ourselves. Not necessarily selfishly, but it relates back to ourselves.
Right. The object we choose becomes part of the self that chooses it. It expresses who we are. So volition, the act of willing, is the identity of the universal will, the capacity and the particular desire, the content. It's the self carrying itself out, projecting itself into existence. It's fundamentally self-realization.
So my choices aren't random, but they are my choices because they express me, my character, my values, my history.
Precisely. And here's the crucial bit about determination. He says the self that is abstracted is the abstraction not only from the particular desire, but also from the whole self, the self which embodies all past acts, and that the abstraction is determined by that from which it is abstracted.
Okay, that sounds dense. Break it down.
It means even when you feel like you're standing back and choosing freely, that very act of choosing is determined by your entire self, your whole history, your character, your habits, your place in the world, everything that makes you you. Your choices aren't isolated events floating free. They are deeply embedded in and flow from the totality of who you are.
So I choose, but my choice is determined by me, by the whole person I am.
That's the essence of it. It's determined self-realization. You aren't being forced by something external like a puppet master, but your choice inevitably reflects the internal necessity of your own nature, shaped by everything that has gone before.
Wow. That definitely clashes with the idea of just picking anything off a menu completely free from your past or character. And this connects directly to his view of duty being objective, right? Not just my subjective whim.
Absolutely. Duty, for Bradley, exists independently of their position by this or that person. He insists, my duty may be mine and no other man's, but I do not make it mine. You don't invent your duties based on personal preference.
It comes from your station, from the objective moral order of the community.
Exactly. This is the complete opposite of thinking morality is just subjective, arbitrary choice. When we act morally, our will isn't some separate thing imposing itself. It's aligning with and manifesting this larger objective will, the will of the moral organism. Remember, the will of the objective world wills itself in us.
So true freedom, in this picture, isn't about breaking free from determination, but about being determined by the right thing, by your true whole self, which is connected to this objective moral order.
You've got it. That's the paradox. And that's why he's so critical of that shallow idea of freedom, the liberty to do what one pleases.
Yeah, he said that gets tramped on pretty quickly when something important is at stake for the community.
Right. In times of crisis, collective need overrides individual whim. He saw radical individualism not just as wrong, but as a delusion of theory that leads to the starvation and mutilation of human nature if pursued practically.
Because it cuts us off from the source of our true self and meaning.
Exactly. For Bradley, true freedom, genuine liberty, isn't found in isolation or absence of constraint. It's found within the community, within its institutions and structures. It's where the individual finds his destination, his universal and singular essence, ready to his hand as an outward existence. You fulfill yourself by living out your part in the objective moral world.
Like the musician finding freedom, not in playing random notes, but in mastering their part within the orchestra's harmony.
Perfect analogy again. That's the freedom of self-realization through participation, not escape.
And this ties into rights and duties too. He sees them as interdependent, not absolute individual possession.
Absolutely. Two sides of one coin. No right without duty, no duty without right and rights. They only exist together within the whole. And then comes that really startling statement for modern ears. The sphere of private right has rights only so long as it is right and is duty. It exists merely on sufferance.
Wow. So individual rights aren't absolute trump cards. They only have validity as part of the moral order?
That's his view. They derive their legitimacy from their function within the whole, links to duties. It reinforces that true freedom isn't about demanding limitless private rights based on arbitrary choice, but about fulfilling your function within the organic system. That's where genuine self-realization, and thus true freedom, lies for Bradley. It's being determined by the good, by the objective will embodied in the community.
Okay, so we've traced Bradley's path, rejecting hedonism and Kantianism, proposing self-realization through my station and its duties within a moral organism, and seeing true freedom within that framework, not outside it. But even that, he admitted, wasn't fully resolved. There were still contradictions, which points towards religion.
Exactly. He sees morality, even at its best in my station, as an endless process. And because it's endless, it's also, in a way, a self-contradiction. The ideal, the ought to be, is always striven for, but it is not fully achieved. Not in us, not in the world. There's this constant gap.
The striving never ends, the contradiction never fully resolves within morality itself.
Right. But, crucially, he says, man feels or knows himself as such. We are aware of this gap, this incompleteness, and to feel a contradiction is ipso facto to be above it. Our awareness of the limitation means we somehow transcend it, or at least yearn for something beyond it. This very awareness, this dissatisfaction with morality's endless striving, creates a hunger for a further final resolution.
A resolution that morality alone can't provide. And that's where religion comes in for Bradley.
That's where it comes in. Religion, he says, is definitively more than morality. What's it add? It introduces belief in an object, a not myself, an object, further, which is real.
An objective reality beyond ourselves.
Yes, and this real object is nothing less than the ideal self considered as realized and real. It's the moral ideal, the perfection we strive for, understood not just as an ought to be, but as something that already is. Fully realized, fully real.
So God, or the absolute. The perfect reality where the gap between is and ought is already closed.
Precisely. It's the recognition of an already existing perfect unity that finally resolves the tension inherent in morality's endless struggle towards an ideal it never fully reaches. Finding it already there provides a kind of ultimate peace or resolution.
And this requires faith. How does he understand faith?
Faith for Bradley is really active and profound. It's not just intellectual assent, like believing a fact. It is both the belief in the reality of an object and the will that that object be real. It involves your whole being.
Belief and will.
Yes. Through faith, you recognize my true self in the religious object, and you achieve the identification of myself with that both by judgment and will. It's an act of uniting your intellect and your will with this ultimate perfect reality.
What does that achieve for the individual?
It allows you to negate the false private self, that
Yeah.
fragmented, contradictory, striving self of ordinary morality, and embrace this inward assurance of being one with the divine. In that oneness, the contradictions are resolved not by eliminating the striving in this world, but by seeing it within the context of an already achieved perfection.
That's a powerful integration of belief, will, and feeling. But if religion offers this higher resolution, does it give us different duties than morality? Do religious rules replace moral rules?
No, and this is important. Bradley argues that, in terms of content, religious duties are moral duties. The worlds of morality and religion must coincide, practically. Religion doesn't invent a whole new set of actions you have to do.
So what does it add then?
It adds a deeper understanding, a more profound motivation, and a sense of ultimate realization. In religion, you see the divine will reflect itself in us. And through your own conscious energy, you carry out both its and our end in the world. You're doing the same moral actions, but now you understand them as participating in the divine will, expressing your true, unified self, which is already one with God.
So it reconciles the is and the ought. In faith, the ideal isn't just something you should strive for. It's recognized as already fully real in the divine, even while you continue the moral struggle in the finite world.
Exactly. It reframes the struggle. It gives it ultimate meaning and context. You're acting morally not just out of duty or obligation, but as an expression of your unity with the perfect reality.
So ultimately, for Bradley, morality finds its completion, its final answer, in religion.
That's his conclusion. Morality, with its endless striving and contradictions, is consummated in oneness with God. There, the contradiction is eternally resolved. The deep spirit's hunger, which finite morality and even my station couldn't fully satisfy, finds its ultimate satisfaction in identifying with this infinite, already realized ideal. It's the final harmony.
Wow. What an intellectual journey Bradley takes us on, from tearing down those simpler ethical theories to building up this idea of self-realization within a social organism, finding freedom there, and then finally resolving the remaining tensions through a religious lens. It's quite something.
It really is. And even though ethical studies was written, back in the 1870s, so much of it still feels incredibly relevant, doesn't it?
It really does. Especially his critiques of pure individualism or purely abstract duty. They force you to think hard about community, about purpose, about how complex moral life actually is.
Absolutely. He really challenges our modern assumptions about radical individual freedom, suggesting quite provocatively that maybe true flourishing isn't found in total independence, but in deep connection, in finding our place, our function, within a larger, meaningful whole.
Which leaves us with a really potent thought to chew on, doesn't it? A challenge maybe to how we often think today.
What's that?
Well, if Bradley is right, or even partly right, if our true free will isn't found in some kind of arbitrary, unconstrained choice, but actually in the harmonious alignment of our individual will with this larger, objective, maybe even divine universal will, what does that really imply for how we chase personal autonomy today? And what does it mean for how we think about collective action, about building a good society here in the 21st century?
That's a huge question. It really pushes us to reconsider where we look for meaning and fulfillment. Is it really in limitless, isolated choice? Or is it perhaps in discovering and embracing our essential role within a reality, a community, a moral order that's actually bigger than us, something that gives our individual lives context and purpose?
Something profound to mull over, definitely. We really hope you, listening, will take these ideas and ponder them. Think about your own sense of moral obligation, the nature of yourself, how you relate to your community, and maybe something beyond.
Yeah, go out and explore more philosophy or just observe how these dynamics play out in the world, in your own life. It's fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you for diving deep with us today.